Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy this content, please hit that subscribe button right now.
What's going on, Mets fans? And I need you to brace yourself because what I'm about to tell you might be the most damning thing we've uncovered about David Stearns in this front office yet. We need to talk about the communication breakdown with Edwin Díaz, how it happened, exactly when it happened, and why it proves that David Stearns has absolutely no understanding of how to manage relationships with star players in a big market. Hit that like button right now if you're tired of watching this organization fumble basic human interaction, and make sure you stay until the end, because when you see the actual timeline of events, you're going to realize just how preventable this disaster really was. Let me walk you through exactly what happened with Edwin Díaz, because the details matter here. This isn't some vague story about miscommunication. This is a specific sequence of events that shows gross incompetence from the front office. So pay attention, because every single step of this timeline is going to make you more and more furious about how badly this was handled. Edwin Díaz finished the 2025 season as the Mets closer. He had his ups and downs during the year, but he was still one of the elite relievers in baseball when healthy. Going into the offseason, everyone understood that Díaz was going to explore free agency. That's normal. That's expected. Players have every right to test the market and see what they're worth. But at that point, there was no animosity, no bad blood. The relationship between Díaz and the Mets was fine. He had been with the organization for years. He'd been through injuries and comebacks. There was mutual respect and understanding. Everything was normal. Then, on December 3rd, David Stearns pulled the trigger on a trade to acquire Devin Williams from the Brewers. Williams is an excellent reliever. Elite stuff, one of the best setup men in baseball. On paper, it's a good move. More bullpen depth is always valuable. But here's where everything went wrong. Here's where David Stearns revealed that he has absolutely no understanding of basic human communication and relationship management. Stearns made that trade without talking to Edwin Díaz first. Let me be very clear about what I mean. I'm not saying Díaz didn't approve of the trade. I'm not saying he had veto power. I'm saying that David Stearns didn't even pick up the phone to give Edwin a heads up that it was happening. He didn't call him and say, hey, we're bringing in another high-level reliever. Here's what we're thinking. Here's how we see the bullpen shaking out. We still value you. Nothing. Zero communication. Edwin Díaz found out about the Devin Williams trade the exact same way that you and I found out about it, through social media and news reports. Now, put yourself in Edwin's shoes for a second. You're one of the best closers in baseball. You've been with this organization for years. You're heading into free agency, so you're already thinking about your future and what it might look like. And then suddenly, you're scrolling through Twitter or checking your phone, and you see that your team just traded for another elite closer without telling you, without warning you, without explaining what it means for your role or your future. How would you feel? What would that tell you about how much the organization values you? Multiple sources close to Edwin have confirmed that he felt blindsided. He felt disrespected. He immediately understood that the Mets were moving on from him, even though nobody from the organization had actually told him that directly. And that feeling, that sense of being disrespected and undervalued, that's what ultimately led to him signing with the Dodgers just a couple weeks later. Because here's what happened next in the timeline. After the Williams trade, after Edwin had time to process what it meant, the Mets front office finally decided to reach out. They finally tried to have a conversation about his future. They finally attempted to engage in contract negotiations, but by then the damage was done. Edwin's mindset had completely shifted. He wasn't thinking about staying with the Mets anymore. He was thinking about where else he could go. He was open to other teams. He was ready to move on. The Dodgers came in with their offer, 3 years, $51 million, a completely reasonable deal, nothing crazy, nothing the Mets couldn't afford, and Edwin jumped at it immediately. He didn't give the Mets time to counter. He didn't try to leverage the offer to get more money from New York. He just said yes to Los Angeles and moved on. And you know why? Because the Dodgers made him feel wanted. They communicated with him from the beginning. They told him exactly how they saw him fitting into their bullpen. They treated him with respect and professionalism. They did all the basic things that the Mets should have done but didn't. Now, here's what makes this timeline so damning for David Stearns. The entire disaster happened over the course of about 2 weeks. December 3rd, the Williams trade happens without any communication to Diaz. Mid-December, the Mets finally reach out to try to negotiate. December 15th or 16th, Edwin signs with the Dodgers. 2 weeks. That's how fast the relationship deteriorated. That's how quickly the Mets went from having a realistic chance to retain their closer to watching him sign with a division rival. And it was all completely avoidable. All David Stearns had to do was make one phone call before the Williams trade, one 5-minute conversation where he explained the thinking, where he said, Edwin, we're going to bring in another elite reliever, but we still see you as a key part of this bullpen. We want to keep you. Let's figure out how to make this work. That's it. That's all it would have taken to prevent this entire mess. But Stearns didn't do it. And you want to know why? Because he doesn't think that way. He doesn't consider the human element of these decisions. In his mind, acquiring Devin Williams was a baseball move that made the team better. Period. End of analysis. He didn't think about how it would be received by Edwin Díaz. He didn't consider that it might damage the relationship. He didn't factor in that elite players have options and feelings and pride. He just made what he thought was a smart baseball decision without considering any of the downstream consequences. And this is the pattern with David Stearns. Every single move he makes is evaluated purely on analytical merit. Does it make the team better on paper? Does it improve our roster construction? Does it give us more flexibility? Those are the only questions he asks. He never asks, how is this going to impact our relationship with this player? How is this going to be perceived? How can we communicate this in a way that maintains trust and respect? That's why Pete Alonso never got an offer. Stearns looked at the numbers and decided Pete wasn't worth it, so there was no need to even have a conversation. That's why Brandon Nimmo got traded without warning. Stearns saw an opportunity to improve roster flexibility, so he pulled the trigger without considering what it meant to trade a homegrown fan favorite. That's why Edwin Díaz felt blindsided by the Williams trade. Stearns made a move he thought was smart without thinking about how it would affect the player who was already here, and the consequences are piling up. The Mets have now lost 2 star players in Pete Alonso and Edwin Díaz, not because they couldn't afford them, not because the players demanded unreasonable contracts, but because David Stearns destroyed the relationships through poor communication and lack of basic professional courtesy. That's organizational malpractice. That's front office incompetence at the highest level. Let me also point out that this isn't just about Edwin Díaz. This is about the message it sends to every other player in baseball. When word gets around that the Mets don't communicate with their players, that they make moves without warning, that they treat star players like they're disposable, that impacts every future negotiation, that makes it harder to sign free agents, that makes it harder to retain your own guys, because players talk to each other. Agents talk to each other, and the narrative that's developing around the Mets under David Stearns is not a good one. Edwin Díaz is now telling people that the Dodgers are a winning organization with great communication. He's praising them for the exact things the Mets failed at. That's not random. That's not him just being diplomatic. That's him sending a very clear message about why he left and what was wrong with his experience in New York. And every player who hears that message is going to think twice before signing with the Mets or agreeing to an extension. So here's the timeline one more time, because I want to make sure everyone understands how preventable this was. December 3rd, Stearns trades for Williams without talking to Díaz. 2 weeks of silence while Edwin processes what that means and starts feeling disrespected. Mid-December, the Mets finally reach out, but the relationship is already damaged. December 15th or 16th, Edwin signs with the Dodgers. That's it. That's the whole disaster. One phone call on December 2nd could have prevented all of it. But David Stearns doesn't operate that way. He doesn't think relationship management is part of his job. He thinks his job is to make smart baseball decisions, and if players get upset about those decisions, that's their problem. But the results speak for themselves. The Mets are losing star players because their front office can't handle basic human communication. And until that changes, until Stearns learns that managing relationships is just as important as analyzing statistics, this pattern is going to continue. I want to hear from you in the comments. After seeing this timeline, after understanding exactly how this went down, do you think David Stearns is the right person for this job? Can he learn to communicate better, or is this just who he is? Because I'm telling you right now, if the Mets keep losing players because of communication breakdowns, Steve Cohen is going to run out of patience fast. Hit that subscribe button for more in-depth breakdowns of what's really happening with this organization, and I'll see you in the next video where we continue exposing the dysfunction at the top of this franchise.